All right, we're going to call the meeting to order at 5:34 p.m. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May 7th, 2024 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin, as a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, I have a few reminders regarding public comments. Individuals who would like to address the board, a request to speak card must be given to the assistant clerk before the announcement of the agenda item. If you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or on the consent calendar, you must do so under the public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or the agenda items list open for public comment posted above the table located at the front entrance. Also, this meeting is being interpreted. We ask that everyone addressing the board to speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Dawkins.
Present.
Board Member Espinoza.
Present.
Board Member Height.
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Present.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, Vice Chair Guadalupe and Chair Cantor is absent. The next item on the agenda is Statement of Conflict of Interest. Are there any? Okay, hearing none. Before we move forward to the next item, we should elect a temporary presiding officer to lead the meeting tonight. Do we have any nominations for who should be the temporary presiding officer?
I nominate Tomasa.
Is your mic on? I can't hear you. You nominate Tomasa?
Yes.
I'll second that.
I don't know what the term is.
Okay, I'm sorry, it must have went off. Hold on. It's on? Needs to be a little closer, probably. And, do you, so Board Member Height, you say you nominate Board Member Espinosa? Okay. Okay, and Tomasa, you can nominate yourself if you like, or you can nominate someone else.
No, yo nominaba al... Ay, se me fue el apellido. Ay,
Okay, we are going to get a
Line.
script in Spanish.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go upstairs and get another script if she becomes the chair tonight. Did you want to nominate yourself or someone else?
yo quiero nominar a Elaine.
Oh, she wants to nominate Ali.
Elaine.
Yeah.
Well, I'll second that one.
Yeah, I'm about to say, unfortunately, I brought my scarf and thing because I've got a throat thing going on. So, although I'm honored, thank you, I don't think I can do it.
Well, to let you know, everything is script, so you will have a script to read. And whomever you nominate, I'm just letting everyone know, whoever is the chair tonight, you will be provided with a script. So you're not just freelancing it. You will be told what to say.
So, in my stead, I nominate Jim Knight.
Okay, so
I second.
Board Member Dawkins eliminate Jim Height, Board Member Height, and
Second.
Tomasa nominates Board Member Height too. Who do you nominate?
Let's get this over with so we can keep moving. I'll nominate myself.
Okay, you nominate yourself. Okay, all right. So basically, I need a motion to nominate Board Member Height as the presiding officer tonight. Can I get a motion?
I make a motion to nominate Board Member Height as presiding officer tonight.
Okay, can I get a
I
second?
second the motion.
Okay. All right, we'll take a quick vote. Board Member Dawkins,
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza,
Yes.
and Board Member Height.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. The presiding officer for the night is Board Member Jim Height. Okay, so I will give you this script. So we are starting here. You read everything in the red.
Okay.
And then if you need help, I'll guide you. But everything in the
Okay.
red you read.
So
Okay?
am I starting now, or are you going to do
I'm
this?
going to start. So
Okay,
I'm all
got it.
purple, and you read the
Perfect.
red. Okay?
Got it.
All right. You got this. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're going to move forward. The next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda tonight? Are there any changes in the agenda?
There's no changes from staff.
Board Member Height?
Are there any changes to the
Agenda,
agenda from staff?
he said no.
Okay.
We'll go to the next
Got
page.
it. Okay. I'll get clearer on this.
It's okay.
Are there any changes to the agenda from the board members?
No.
No. Okay. All right, hearing none, the next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have one speaker under public forum. The speaker shall be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When your name is called to address the board, stating your name and city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The only speaker is Ms. Marilyn Langlois. Please come forward.
Good evening, board members and staff. First of all, I want to thank you all for the excellent work you've been doing in our city. It's been really, really important, and I really appreciate it as a Richmond resident. First of all, I just want to say I'm glad this meeting is happening, that you were able to get interpretation, Spanish language interpretation. I know that's been a challenge the last few meetings, so I hope that from now you will be able to have a reliable source of Spanish language interpretation, which is very important for everyone, both board members and community members, to be able to follow what's going along, so I appreciate that. And then in terms of tonight's meeting on the budget, just generally, I want to say that I hope you can find a way to maximize compliance with the rental fees. I know that's been talked about a lot over the years, and I think the staff are doing a pretty good job, but it's a challenge, and so I would just encourage any strategies to get as close to 100% payment of all of the the landlord housing fees would be really great, because with that money, you can put that to good use for the community. So anything you can do in that score would be really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker and only speaker. The next item on the agenda is item F1 under budget. Item F1 is to receive a presentation regarding the rent program's current fiscal situation and budget options. Direct staff to prepare a draft budget for fiscal year 2024 through 25, reflecting budget option 1 and budget option 2, with the board's budget priorities incorporated in both options. This item was continued from the April 29, 2024 special rent board meeting. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. And we will now hear the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Acting Chair Height and members of the Rent Board. Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director. I'll be presenting a recap of program data, board priorities, and an update on current financials and budget options. Now, this first slide I put in here to help the board and the community better understand our budget from a programmatic point of view. As mentioned at previous board meetings, most of the rent program budget, or for that the budgets of any city department, are comprised of salaries and fringe benefits. Salaries make up approximately 85% of the rent program budget, the other 15% devoted to supplies, contracts with service providers, insurance, training, mailing, and printing costs, among others. So, when public agencies develop budgets, the established best practice is to create line items for salaries, fringe benefits, supplies, contracts, insurance, training, and so on and so forth. Those line items, especially salary and fringe benefits, are designed to support program activities and services. So as I mentioned, to help the board and the public better understand the budget from a more programmatic perspective, this slide explains the budget through the staffing necessary to effectuate the services required for the administration and enforcement of the rent ordinance. And let's start with our largest unit, the Public Information and Enrollment Unit. If you could toggle. Now, the services provided by the Public Information and Enrollment Unit are housing counseling, landlord-tenant mediation and dispute resolution, community education, outreach, billing, property enrollment, tenancy registration, collections, and others. We have 7 full-time employees that work in the Public Information and Enrollment Unit, and a total of $887,765 in salaries and benefits. So the Public Information and Enrollment Unit makes up about 30% of our budget. Let's go to the next one. Next is the Hearings Unit. The services provided by the Hearings Unit is primarily the rent adjustment petition process to coordinate all of the petitions that are filed, to hold hearings, and to provide support around that. Requires 2.5 FTEs, full-time employees, $445,495 in salaries and benefits, and the Hearings Unit makes up about 15% of our agency. Next. Next is the management or executive management unit. This is the unit that their main focus is overseeing board meetings, making sure the board meetings happen, making sure all of the agenda reports are done, coordinating with the board clerk to make sure the packets go out on time, coordinating with the board clerk to make sure that we have all of the materials necessary for our board meetings. And of course, our board meetings are now bilingual, or have been for some time now, and that has also been a part of the hearings coordinator job, is to make sure that all of our board-related work is interpreted or translated when necessary. So the executive management unit makes up, has 2.25 full-time employees and $605,092 in salaries and benefits, and make up 20% of the budget. And then there is the legal unit. So the services provided by the legal unit include the legal counsel. Could you hit it one more time? Include the legal counsel provided by our general counsel and staff attorney for the board, legal counsel for the board, legal counsel for the agency. Also handling all of the appeal recommendations, Public Information Act requests, so processing Public Information Act requests, legal support for the public information and enrollment staff to make sure that the information they're giving is correct, among many other things as well. But these are the main services, and the legal unit is comprised of 2.25 full-time employees and $556,424 in salaries and benefits, making up 19% of the budget. So this is, like I said, a good way to visualize our budget from a salary perspective and in terms of the services that each unit provides to the community to enforce and administer the rent ordinance. Go to the next slide. So let's recap some of the program activity that was discussed at the last board meeting, and let's move on. As mentioned at the last board meeting, there has been a substantial increase in outreach, education, and petition activity in fiscal year 2023-24 compared to the prior fiscal year. Counseling activity has increased by 11%. Our Spanish counseling sessions have increased by 37%. And we've seen a 57% increase in legal service referrals. Mediations were one of the only areas of activity that actually decreased. But overall, our activities increased significantly in the public information unit and the hearings unit. The public information unit also processes courtesy compliance letters, and we saw a slight increase in that by 3.5%. There's also a 57% increase in rent increase notices that are filed with the rent program, and a 34.5% increase in termination of tenancy notices filed. Now, it's important to note that that number means that we're receiving 57% more rent increase notices that we must process, put in our system to make sure that we keep good records on who's in compliance and who's not in terms of the requirement to provide a copy of rent increase notices to the rent program within 10 business days. Now, we've also seen obviously a significant increase in our interpretation and translation budget, increased by 134% this last year, or this current fiscal year. We also saw a dramatic rise in activity around petitions. In fact, we saw a 388% increase in tenant rent reduction petitions. We did see a decrease in landlord petitions, but I think I mentioned at the last board meeting that that was somewhat of a strange circumstance because one landlord filed 7 separate petitions the previous year. We also saw a 275% increase in relocation, temporary and permanent relocation petitions. And we saw the number of appeals going to the board double. Next slide. I'm not kidding when I say that the greatest need of the agency is the need for more resources to address both a sizable backlog of processing property enrollments, late fee waivers, and most importantly, the collection of the rental housing fee associated with delinquent accounts. Billing enrollment staff have essentially reached their bandwidth in terms of processing late fee waivers, enrollment forms, tenancy registration forms, and undertaking and completing administrative determinations, which are a very laborious process of research associated with that. As you can see, we have quite a few rental units that still owe for this fiscal year and quite a few delinquent accounts. And to tackle all that, in the past, we hired a collection agency, but there's only so much that they can actually do in terms of collecting on these accounts, and they get a percentage as well of the fee. So that said, additional resources are needed to focus on increasing the collection rate and collecting from delinquent accounts. Next slide. At the April 17th regular board meeting, board members were unanimous in agreeing that expanding outreach and community education was among the top priority. Expansion of outreach and community education would include increasing the number of mass mailings to landlords and tenants, continuing to implement and develop the comprehensive outreach plan, and reinstituting in-person bilingual workshops on Saturdays, as well as increasing community engagement by canvassing local nonprofits, businesses, and organizations and establishing connections with them. As outreach and education is a top priority for the board, and the board has shown a strong interest in developing creative outreach ideas and strategies, staff recommend that the board consider in this upcoming fiscal year appointing an ad hoc committee focused solely on outreach and education. So that would mean that board members, at least up to 2 board members, would meet with an assigned staff person and work together to continue to develop the outreach activities and come up with policy suggestions around those. Next slide. So speaking of the comprehensive outreach plan, I thought it'd be a good idea to update the board on it a little bit and show you some of the progress that we're making or we have planned. So our outreach plan consists essentially of 4 main components. The first are mass mailing projects. In this category, you'll see that there are a list of planned mass mailing projects that will be sent out to all landlords and tenants registered with the rent program. Our mailing will be split into batches so as to not overwhelm staff and the bandwidth of the copy center and mailing room. In the next fiscal year, we have also some other ongoing projects that staff are going to be conducting on a daily basis. That is, one of those projects is called the New Owner Outreach Project. And that is essentially reaching out to new owners and letting them know of their obligations under the rent ordinance, or making sure that the property is still rent controlled or rented, or whether it's now owner occupied. We also have ongoing day-to-day mass mailing through the courtesy compliance letters, and I think if you look at our last year's annual report, one of the areas of activity that was pretty significant during the pandemic and continues to be significant are letters that go out to landlords and tenants when there is when the rent program is made aware of possible violations of the rent ordinance. All right, let's go on. Now, the other component of the comprehensive outreach plan involves increasing our community engagement, in-person community engagement. So the community events on this slide are confirmed through July of 2024. And our plan is to schedule at least one event each month. However, this is obviously subject to change based on staffing and the bandwidth of staff. It's really important to ensure that staff are available on the weekends before committing to an event. Now, through the summer, we have a few scheduled events, and into the fall and the winter, our plan is to bring back our in-person workshops. During the fall and winter, this is typically when staff have more availability, as it is often after our billing period, which can be very busy. And during that time, during the billing period, there's usually not only a high volume of calls, but also many walk-ins from property owners who want to make sure that they're in compliance with the rent ordinance. All right. Oh, go back to that slide, I'm sorry. There's also, part of the outreach plan involves canvassing. Canvassing essentially means that our housing counselors essentially have found out that word of mouth is one of the most common methods that the community learns about the rent program. So as they're counseling, we often ask folks, how did you find out about the rent program? And usually it's a referral from someone else who either knew someone or they themselves were dealing with an issue. So our staff has contacted a variety of local organizations, which is not limited to the list shown on the screen, to inquire if we can leave information, informational materials at their various locations. This also includes, making sure that they receive regular updates and brochures associated with our activity. In some cases, we may be available also to do targeted workshops for those organizations. We've done that in the past with the Realtors Association. We've done it with other tenant associations. And this is something that is very effective because you have a captive audience there and they usually have a lot of questions and concerns. All right, let's move on. So another part of our outreach plan is conducting outreach through the media or through media. So the rent program staff are aware that information travels very quickly through a variety of media platforms. So staff have made it a priority for them, and they make a lot of effort to post regularly on social media sites, to announce workshops, events through our listserv and the city manager's weekly report. And the listserv and the weekly report are essentially email blasts to folks who have subscribed to receive information from the rent program and or the city. Our staff found an online electronic system that is primarily used by our local school district. It's called Peach Jar. Peach Jar is a platform that delivers resources and information to the parents of the students. And we have heard that this may be one of the most effective tools that we can use to reach out to the folks who send their kids to school in Richmond. We also can use indicators and some of the, what are they called? Metrics associated with social media posts to see how many people have clicked on a particular post or forwarded it or shared it with other folks. And we found that is another way that we receive, that people contact us is through our social media account. So we have a Facebook account, and sometimes folks will actually direct message our Facebook account and we'll respond. We'll have a housing counselor reach out to you and assist you with your issue. All right, 1 second. So obviously we believe that our relationship with the community is an ongoing commitment. We believe that canvassing to a variety of organizations has helped with these direct referrals to the rent program. We've also found that mass mailings are effective, as well as community events when we are in person. Okay, now we're going to move on to more of the meat of the agenda report that you received. So the issue tonight, and I'm going to essentially read the statement of the issue, is that in accordance with section 11.100.060L of the Richmond Fair Rent Just Cause for Eviction and Homeowner Protection Ordinance, the amount of the residential rental housing fee will be determined by the City Council after a recommendation by the Board is provided to the City Council. Prior to July 1st, the Board is required to hold a public hearing on a proposed budget and adopt an annual budget for the ensuing fiscal year. On April 17, 2024, the Rent Board received a presentation from staff outlining budget requirements, the budget process and timeline, and a discussion of budget requirements and some initial recommendations within the context of program activity. Within the context of that program activity, staff presented data that illustrated the need for additional resources in certain areas. After the presentation, staff solicited members' feedback, input, and budget priorities, and the Board concurred that expanding outreach and education was a top priority. After the April 17, 2024 regular meeting of the Rent Board, as is done monthly, staff reviewed the budgeted versus actual revenue and expenditure report and projected, based on expense burn rate and revenue, that revenue to be collected, a probable deficit by the end of the current fiscal year was probable. Now, staff are ramping up collection efforts for the last 2 months of the fiscal year to avoid a possible deficit. It is, however, more likely than not that the rent program will end the fiscal year with a $277,698 deficit. Considering the program's current financial situation and the possibility that it may take some time to increase the program's collection rate, adding new positions or increasing spending is a concern, and it may lead to a mounting deficit. However, if the Board decides to add any new staff resources, those resources should focus on increasing the collection rate of the rental housing fee and addressing the significant rise in the rent adjustment petitions filed. And there is no fiscal impact related to this item. So the current projected budget deficit should inform the Board and assist with budget decisions. At present, the budget deficit, while projected, may not transpire if 2 events occur. The first is if staff's current efforts to increase collections for the last 2 months of the fiscal year are successful. The second factor contributing to the projected deficit is the fact that the City of Richmond charged the rent program for cost pool charges that were not only challenged, but not budgeted. A full cost allocation study was necessary before cost pool charges were to be established between the city and the rent program. At present, the executive director and the city manager are in negotiations regarding a possible waiver of future cost pool charges to incentivize collaboration between the city and the rent program. At the April 17th, 2024 regular meeting of the Rent Board, staff presented budget requirements, process and timeline, program activity, and initial high-level recommendations. Key highlights of the presentation were that the rent program activity has increased significantly in the hearings unit, with petitions increasing by 388% compared to the previous fiscal year, and billing and registration staff had a substantial backlog of work associated with late fee waivers, administrative determinations, the processing of enrollment forms, and collections on delinquent accounts. The Board was also made aware of a notable increase in counseling, compliance outreach, legal service referrals, and the need for more reliable interpretation services. Fiscal year 2023-24 program activity data revealed a need for additional resources to focus on increasing our collection rate, enhancing outreach and education, and handling the rise in petitions. After the presentation, the board agreed and directed staff to come back with a budget that focused on enhancing outreach, community education, community engagement, and education. Staff were prepared to present budget options that included more resources for the hearings and petitions, rental housing fee compliance, collection, and enhanced outreach and education. Now, after the April 17th Rent Board meeting, staff, as I mentioned, reviewed the collection amounts at the end of the third quarter and projected the probable deficit by the end of the fiscal year. As I mentioned before, based on possible and probable budget deficit for the beginning of the fiscal year of approximately $277,000, adding staff resources could lead to mounting deficits if collection rates do not increase. Now, generally, deficit spending is not recommended for other reasons. Those reasons for us, for the rent program, would include loss of autonomy from the city of Richmond and possible future cuts to program activities and services to offset a growing debt. However, adding resources for an additional compliance staff person whose focus would be on increasing the collection rate would likely be an investment that pays for itself, as the increase in the compliance rate would offset some or all of the cost of the additional position. And increasing the compliance rate would help mitigate the chances of future deficits. Can you, let's see here. I think I already won. Next slide. So now we're going to get into budget options. Budget option 1 is essentially a status quo budget or a base budget with an increase in mass mailing outreach funds, an increase in interpretation funds for interpretation services to reduce the number of board meetings that could be canceled due to the interpreter not being able to attend. Budget option 1 would essentially be the same as last year's fiscal budget with MOU negotiated salary increases and, as I mentioned, increase in interpretation and mass mailings. Now, staff are still estimating the cost for the additional interpretation service. This, however, it's likely that with the advancement of artificial intelligence-based interpretation services, that some of these costs may decrease in the future. To address one of the board's top priorities, can you go back? We're still at option 1. Thank you. Excuse me. To address one of the board's top priorities, namely outreach and community education, staff recommend including in budget option 1 an increase in the budget for mass mailings to all tenants and landlords, and this would be a doubling of those mailings from 2 to 4 times a year. Staff are still estimating the cost of doubling the mass mailing projects, but the current mass mailing budget of $30,780 would likely increase by at least twofold to around $60,000. Now, in budget option 1, one of the pressing needs of the agency would be addressed through more resources for the hearings-related work. And staff have determined that this could be satisfied through the reclassification of a vacant entry-level office assistant position to an administrative trainee or similar position. And an administrative trainee is a journey-level position, and the Office Assistant 1 position is an entry-level position. Due to the incredible rise in petitions filed, hearings and appeals heard in fiscal year 2023-24, which frequently require interpretation, translation, and communication with monolingual Spanish-speaking tenants and landlords, staff have determined that a journey-level position is necessary to provide clerical support to the hearings unit. Reclassifying the office assistant to an administrative trainee would actually reduce the budget by approximately $3,972, and we would be budgeting to hire in the second quarter of fiscal year 2024-25 to lessen the impact on the budget. Now we can go to option 2. Okay, so option 2 is essentially option 1 with the addition of a compliance specialist to be hired in quarter 2. And that would add approximately $88,000 to the budget. Now, reclassifying the vacant office assistant role would actually decrease the budget by approximately $4,000. So to reduce the impact on the fiscal year 2024-25 budget, a compliance specialist and an administrative trainee would be budgeted to be hired during the second quarter of the budget. And as you'll see, both option 1 and option 2 include resources for increased translation and interpretation services, doubling of mass mailings, and the reclassification of an office assistant position, as well as MOU salary increases. Now, budget option 1, you'll see the increase in funds for interpretation and translation is estimated to cost about $27,300. The cost of doubling our mass mailings for all landlords and all tenants would be approximately $30,000. The MOU requires salary increases amount to about $218,000 for all staff, all salaried staff. And the reclassification of our vacant office assistant position to an admin trainee to address the petition increase and assist with interpretation would be to be hired in the second quarter would actually reduce the budget by $4,000. So the total cost of budget option 1 would be $271,300. Now, option 2 includes everything in option 1, and that budget impact, option 1's budget impact is $271,300. And option 2 goes a step further by adding a compliance specialist who would be hired in the second quarter. And the compliance specialist, their main focus would be on increasing collections on delinquent accounts and discovering new rental units that are currently skirting under the radar. Budget option 2 leads to a total budget increase of $359,000 approximately. Next slide, please. So the recommended action is to receive a presentation regarding the rent program's current financial situation and budget options, and direct staff to prepare a draft budget for fiscal year 2024-25 reflecting budget option 1 and or budget option 2 with the board's priorities incorporated in both options. And with that, I hand it back over to our acting chair, Height, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have or the board may have.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions from the board members? Melissa?
Tengo una pregunta.
I have a question.
Nosotros ya tenemos más o menos pensado cuánto es lo que se le va a cobrar por unidad para el próximo año.
We have an idea what we're going to charge by unit for the next year.
Say it a little louder.
Do we have an idea how we're going to charge per unit for the next year?
Do you mean, do we have an estimate as to what the rental housing fee amount will be?
Si tú quieres un estimado de cuánto se va a cobrar a cada persona por unidad de casa.
Based on the options we provided, I think option one would be $255 per rental unit for controlled rental units and $145 for partially covered units. Partially covered units are those that there's no rent control, but just cause eviction protections apply. Of course, any recommendations that the board has or changes in any of the options would obviously impact or change the potential fee amounts.
Ok. Ok. Ustedes nos comentaron que ya habían estado mandando información a las casas. Y mi pregunta es, ¿esto les ha funcionado o no les ha funcionado?
You guys told us before that you've been sending emails, mails to the community. This is working or no? How is the status of that situation?
So we have a listserv, which is essentially an email blast service, where anyone in the community can receive information about the rent program. And we have approximately somewhere between 1,700 to 1,800 people who have signed up to receive those email blasts. So that's what we were describing when we were talking about emails that go out to the community.
Otra pregunta acerca de eso.
You have another question.
¿Cómo es que se registran a las personas que les envían esta correspondencia?
Tomasa wants to know how you have a record of these people that receive the mails. How you keeping like records of who have it, who receive it, or who doesn't.
Well, if they have signed up for the listserv, then they will receive it. We have the listserv provides that data. Monica, you probably could chime in better on this than I can in terms of how the data is actually collected. But the listserv does have its own way of reporting the metrics. That,
yeah, I guess just sorry, good. Okay.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, is the question how do we collect the emails to the listserv?
Yeah.
Got it. So the listserv the subscriptions are collected in various ways. That's by the enrollment forms that we get from the landlords. They may indicate an email. And that's when staff enters those emails into our subscription list of the listserv. Through community outreach, we have a sign-up sheet at the table, and those who would like to be included and receive notifications, information, events that we have coming up, we take in that information. It's an intake process, and then we upload it into our listserv as well. Even on one-on-one counseling, generally it may come up naturally, where we ask if they'd like to be updated with information such as the AGA or any other information related to the rent program. We also will take that information and add it to our listserv as well.
Una pregunta acerca. ¿Esa información solo le mandan a los departamentos o también a las propiedades a las casas que son rentadas?
Yes, so it goes to anyone who subscribes, not just interdepartmental city departments. It goes out to the public as well. So, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Does she need to translate it? Yes. You could go ahead, Jeanette, and say what she was saying.
No, yo sí entendí lo que ella me está diciendo, pero
She
necesito que
understood. You want me to say it?
no sé si yo necesito que le digas la pregunta.
No, I think she got it. So Tomasa wants to know if, yeah, I forgot, what do you want to say?
Le pregunté que si esa información es mandada a los departamentos solamente o también a las casas que son rentadas.
Okay, that information go only to departments or also for the house that have been rental, that are rentals? What, to all type of property?
Are we still on the listserv?
Ya me está diciendo.
And I responded. Do I need to
Ya,
respond?
ya me respondió a mí.
No, it's, I mean, yeah, we didn't know what she said, that's why we responded to her.
Sí, no sé si entendí.
Y todas las personas que están registradas.
¿Hay alguien específico en la oficina que se dedica a dar alcance a la comunidad?
There's one like a specific position that get
O la
information to
publicidad.
the community
¿O de publicity?
o que se encarga of the publicity of this.
Is there one particular position that is devoted to engagement, community engagement?
Yeah.
The answer is yes and no. We have rent program services, rent program service analysts, our housing counselors, and they conduct most of the outreach and community education. They put together the presentations, they put together outreach materials, educational materials. So they're our main source of outreach and education activity. We also have administrative student interns. Hello to our interns in the back, who also assist with community events. In fact, we were at the Cinco de Mayo on Sunday, and our interns were out there with our analysts, assisting, making sure that we got the word out that we existed. So we do, other staff are also involved in the process of putting together outreach materials. So for example, if we have a housing counselor who's putting together an informational flyer, booklet, brochure, whatever it may be, we have to have it reviewed by not only senior staff, make sure, because this is something going out to the public, but first and foremost by our attorneys to make sure that whatever information that's going out is correct and within the bounds of the law. So all staff in some form or manner are involved in community outreach. However, the main staff who conduct outreach and community education are our rent program services analysts and supporting clerical staff. And of course, Monica, who is the supervisor for our housing counselors.
Do you have any questions?
First, I have a comment. I'd like to apologize to my fellow board members last meeting and to everyone else. The last meeting I kept saying, give me a different perspective other than line item. This is what I was talking about. I just couldn't remember it. So when we're talking about the program layer, 55%, just cause for eviction, 20%, rent control layer, 25%. I kept saying different perspective, but nobody seemed to get the point that that is, I think it's in our fee structure. So I wanted to say to everyone else who wondered, what is she talking about? That's what I was talking about, and I'm happy to have found it. Executive Director, I have a question immediately about your chart here. I took out my calculator and I added up the percentages, and maybe I'm missing something. I only got 84%.
Right. So as you remember in that presentation, I mentioned that salaries make up approximately 85% of the budget. The remaining 15% are for supplies, contracts, and so on and so forth. So this is you know, there's another 14 point something % devoted to those other non-salary line items. But that's not in that slide, but it was mentioned.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
I guess my mind works differently. It sounds like we were in a pickle. $250,000 deficit? And the thing that concerns me being a board member, why didn't I hear about this in December? Did we notice that we were declining? I mean, I don't remember getting any kind of signal from staff saying, oh, we're beginning to slide, we're not keeping up. Is this the fourth quarter? I think it is. I'm just now hearing about $277,000 deficit. So, I mean, like I said, I'm just really concerned that at this late date, I'm hearing this. So now we have a problem to solve. The upcoming meeting, May 17th, will we continue this discussion?
Yes. Yes.
Because I can't think on the spur of the moment, and that 277,000 has got my head reeling. So I'm going to have to go over this with a fine-tooth comb and see what I can find as one board member to help us make a difference here. But again, I'm just saying this for future. I want to hear about this maybe second quarter, that we're having a slight problem. Third quarter, we're having an increased problem. The fact that it's the fourth quarter and now I'm just hearing about this, like I said, I'm astounded. But I did have some questions. There's something about the cost pool item. And I think you said it was charged but not budgeted.
That's
I don't
correct.
understand how that works. How can you not budget something you think you're going to be charged for?
We're trying to understand it as well, and we're having discussions with the city manager around this. We're also having negotiations with the city manager with regard to waiving certain cost pool charges that we feel disincentivize cooperation and collaboration. I think I may have mentioned it at a previous board meeting, but it becomes a problematic thing when you have a non-general fund department paying into the general fund cost pool amounts that pad the general fund, take away from our fund, and yet there's this incentive, built-in incentive on the part of the city to maximize those cost pool charges, in specifically administrative charges, and there's not only that incentive, but then that creates a disincentive for staff who, are concerned that the more interaction that we have, more collaboration that we have with the city, the more that the city is going to charge us. And on top of that, the city continues to ask us to do more stuff for the city. So we're having negotiations around waiving those cost pool charges. If those cost pool charges, if they had not deducted those cost pool charges, the deficit would likely be much less. Fred could speak to the exact numbers. But so it's a combination of two things. One is these cost pool amounts that were taken out that were not budgeted. There's no line item, and we're having discussions with the city about that right now. That may get resolved. However, the other issue is that during this last quarter, we saw a drop-off in payments. We annually, throughout the year, track what our collection rate is. And based on our burn rate and based on what we anticipate to collect, there is a probable deficit. Now, I also mentioned in the presentation that staff are making major efforts right now to collect on these delinquent accounts to help avoid a possible probable deficit. But they're those are efforts that are underway, and we hope to narrow the gap significantly by the end of this fiscal year through our collection efforts, and to establish an agreement with the city to waive these cost pool charges that are discouraging collaboration between the rent program and the city. And just to I could probably let Fred speak more to the, what our numbers looked like early on in the year. But these things do happen. Since we are funded by landlord fees, if landlords stop paying those fees, or if they're delayed on those fees, that impacts our collection rate. And I think we found that the pandemic did have a significant impact on a lot of landlords and their ability to pay all of their bills. And I can tell you from conversations I've had with billing and registration staff, a lot of those landlords are saying, are trying to just delay as much as possible. And some are seeing if they can get away with not paying it at all. So our main focus in terms of resources should be in terms of compliance, increasing our collection rate overall. And our collection rate has gone up and down over the years, but overall, we've seen an increasing collection rate. In this particular year, the year essentially after the pandemic, we've seen this drop in landlords who are paying the fee.
I seem to remember this conversation from last year. I seem to remember that at that time you were having negotiations with the city manager. So those negotiations plus the negotiations this year, I'm not hearing that we're getting anywhere. So I guess what I want to ask is, how are those negotiations going? Because if after the negotiations for 23-24 weren't going well or didn't go well, and then we began this year, you're still negotiating. So now we're talking, over a year of negotiations. I'm not seeing much progress, and again, I'm surprised that the board, or maybe just me, we haven't heard about this isn't going well. So can you tell me, how are the negotiations going?
So negotiations often take a lot of time. Some of our negotiations were impacted by the fact that the joint commissioned new cost pool study that the city and the rent program undertook took longer to complete. So we really couldn't begin our negotiations until we knew what the possible new numbers could look like. After we saw what the new numbers looked like, we started engaging in more regular and more intense negotiations. And at this point, we're very close to an agreement with the city. I can't speak for the city manager, but all indicators are that they're in agreement with the concept of a mutual support agreement where cost pool charges could be waived and the rent program could continue to support the city where we are, to do it.
Board member, if you don't, is this on?
It should be.
All right, board member, if you don't mind, I just want to make sure that we set expectations correctly. The negotiations are ongoing. I'm not going to convict because I'm the one doing the negotiations, are not doing the negotiations, but I'm involved in it. And some of it's legal, so I can't say that in a public setting, but I will say they're ongoing. I'm not going to say that the city manager has committed anything. I will just say that we have made significant progress and that staff, a lot of it was staff pushing the city to the table to finally sit down, which they have done that with us. And I will just tell you all, that should be your expectation. I wouldn't expect an agreement. I wouldn't expect to not have an agreement. Just know that we are in continual negotiations. And just to your latter point, because I think it's my duty to let the board know, especially a new board like you all, or not brand new, but newish, that prior boards before you established policy for the board that they would be receiving 10-year financial projections. Your last question was, how do we not know that we were headed towards a deficit, which is a fair question. Prior boards have required staff to present this board or any board with their budget financial projections. Should have been presented. I hope it's presented at the next meeting, but you should all be aware of not only your fiscal health in this current year and projected fiscal health, but fiscal health in the years going forward.
I appreciate that, General Counsel. I would like to change the subject. I think I've mentioned a couple of times about hybrid meetings. In my way of thinking, a hybrid meeting is another way for outreach. People who don't want to take the time or cannot drive to an in-person meeting can attend a hybrid meeting. So again, in my way of thinking, hybrid meetings are a part of outreach. They seem to be missing from that. That'll be one of my concerns, to see if we can add hybrid meeting to outreach, because I think that's what it is. But my specific point goes back to 2023. And at that time, it was said hybrid meetings were newly proposed, but it also said here that after conducting hybrid board meetings although conducting hybrid board meetings is feasible and funding for it is incorporated into the proposed budget. And I'm going, wait a minute, was in the 23-24 budget, there was money there for hybrid meetings? I mean, that's how I'm interpreting it. And if it was, what happened to the money? Because I went over the budget as far as I could, and I'm not a line item person, as you can probably tell. I couldn't find how much was put for hybrid meetings or where it was, and what happened to the money.
Yeah, so the initial research that we did made it clear that we believed that that it would be feasible and possible to do, just from a financial standpoint, but also from a logistic standpoint. However, there are legal concerns associated with it, and I'd be better for our general counsel to address those issues or speak to you on those issues. And those legal issues prevented us from moving forward with a possible hybrid format.
Yeah, I can speak to that, but the question I heard was, where's the money? How much money and where's the money? And so staff has to answer that. But in terms of why it didn't go forward, it wasn't a legal issue. It's not that it's illegal, and if it were a legal issue, I could not communicate that in public, but because it's not a legal issue, I can tell you what happened. I contacted the city. I think Chair Cantor had asked staff to contact the city, and the rent board generally voted on that. And this was last year, around the same time. And the city informed me, and then I informed the executive director, who then told the board, that the city would not permit the board from conducting hybrid meetings. And they did not want us to, and even though we're an autonomous board, separate from the city council, city manager, and city attorney, we still use city infrastructure. And if they're not going to give us permission to tap into that, like KCRT and all that other good stuff, we couldn't do it.
And when we receive a no for something that the board thinks was important, to whom do we appeal?
If the city tells us no, it's just a no. It's their infrastructure.
So we don't go back and say, by the way, last month we did this, but I think we need to reconsider based on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the legal profession, as we know, is never over. It goes to one court to another, and then it goes back to the legislature. It's never over. You ask until you get what you want. So again, I'm trying to say, we received a no. Part of the board, I didn't hear about that no. And then I'm suggesting that why don't we ask again? I don't understand this. You get one no, and then you fold up your tent and go home.
Well, I mean, this is not a legal issue. And so if it were a legal issue, you would probably have some leverage to then negotiate or threaten something. But it's just not. We don't own the infrastructure. and they say no, so it's a no. It does not prevent the board from directing staff to go back and ask the city, because you can ask as many times, or we can ask as many times as the board would like, but there is no basis for the city to say yes, because there's just no legal issue there.
I got it, okay.
And to answer your question about where the money go, that was in one of the first iterations of the budget, and then after we found out that we couldn't do it, we removed it as a possible, line item.
Okay, okay, thank you. As I said, this, again, my impression, we were in a pickle. Why didn't I hear about this? I need time to think about it. So I'll go through what you presented and come up with some questions that I hope will explain to me how we can get out of this and not go into the next fiscal year with a $250,000 deficit.
Are there any other, do you have, Board Member Espinosa, do you have any more questions?
Yo sí. No tengo, bueno, así como estaba diciendo, el año pasado hablamos de un programa que dijo usted que tal vez lo iba a pensar mejor, que eran las embajadoras. Y ese era un buen programa para que pudiéramos llevar más conocimiento a reclutar a más gente de la comunidad. Pero no he sabido nada acerca de eso y ya llevamos un año.
Last year in the meeting, we talked about a program that you guys say that is going to start working, the ambassadors, and it's more than a year, and I haven't heard anything about it.
So the ambassador idea or program idea was kind of incorporated into the canvassing activity. So as we meet up with folks at the Latina Center or at Catholic Charities or various businesses, those folks, Lifelong Medical is another one that we have been canvassing. We establish a contact person with those agencies. And that contact person, we ask them to essentially be an ambassador. I mean, you're our eyes and ears in the community. You know when there's a tenant who has mold, suffering health problems because of mold, or other problems, health problems because of habitability problems. You know of cases where there's been complaints. And so they are then brought to us by those community, the stakeholders out there, the nonprofit stakeholders. We initially called them ambassadors because the idea is that they would be essentially goodwill ambassadors for the program and conduct some of the distribution of information for us to make sure that the community was more aware of all the activities and programs that we had, services we had.
No, exacto. Ay, disculpen. Me encantaría conocerlas. ¿Ustedes tienen reuniones con ellas entonces?
I would like to meet them. Do you have a meeting with them?
Do we have
Can you repeat that?
Oh, if she would like to meet the ambassadors, do you have any meetings with them?
we don't have regular meetings with the ambassadors or the folks that we canvass, the community members that we canvass, stakeholders. We have discussed doing workshops and special presentations for them and for their members, but it's more of a contact at a particular agency or business that staff know to contact, or they know to contact staff when an issue arises.
Me encantaría que en algún momento, si tenemos este programa ya, que nosotros pudiéramos conocerlas. Si están dando a conocer al Rembor, sería bueno saber quiénes son estas personas.
She said that she would like to meet them. Like, if we have the program, it would be nice and good for her, like, to know and see who they are.
I'm sure that Monica can work with you to connect you with some of the folks that we are canvassing currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Dawkins, do you have another name?
Yes, I do. I have one. As I said, I will have more when at the next meeting. But I'm taking a look at this option 1. We were devastated by not having an interpreter show up for several meetings. And I see here in the third line, investing in a new in-person interpretation service. Is this going to be the same vendor who didn't show up before?
No, that's the whole point of investing in a new one. That's why we would issue a request for proposals to look for a local vendor who could perform that service more reliably. And so that will be kind of one of the main components that we'll be looking for in a new service. The current service that we have is, their business is located in Los Angeles or Southern California, and they don't have a great deal of in-person options in the Bay Area. And that service was initially brought on to provide interpretation services for our hearings and our appeals, and those can be done remotely. Whereas, we need in-person interpretation for our board meetings.
So for the new person, the vetting will get to that point.
Yes, it won't be a particular person per se. It could be, but in all likelihood, it will be a company or a business, a corporation or
Yeah.
business that, has contracts with various interpreters in the area.
Yeah, I think that's a vetting problem, and I think that can be solved. My second question is, I keep hearing one. It would seem to me for something as essential as this, we would have a backup. So you'll have one main person. If that person didn't work, you could dial the next person or the next company to show. In other words, do we have some depth in our in-person interpretation? In other words, I think we need more than one.
Well, we will have more than one if we contract with a new service provider, because we're not planning on, ending the contract with the current provider, because they do a very good job with our hearings and appeals. They just have issues with, occasionally missing the board meetings.
Will the contract amount be reduced for the part that they didn't do well?
That may be an option, yeah. We can do.
I would think
Yeah.
it would be mandatory. I mean, if you, why would you still get paid for something that you obviously can't do or didn't do?
Well, it depends on whether or not you want to have another company as a backup to the main company. So if we have, let's say we contract with a new service and they're very reliable with interpretation, in-person interpretation, but they tell us, oh, unfortunately we can't find somebody, we would still be able to utilize
The
the
one who didn't
current.
show up this time.
Well, they've shown up inconsistently. Not so much at the beginning of the service, but it's become problematic, throughout the middle of the year until now.
I just want to make one last comment. And my comment is this. When I came on the board, I mean, it meant a lot to me. This ordinance and everything that the rent program stands for means a lot to me. The workings to keep this going is important. As a board member, and I would like to ask ongoing, that the board be made aware, since this is our budget, we have to put this budget together, and with your help as staff. But if we don't know what's going on, how on earth can we do our job as well as we want to do, as well as we plan to do? And I would like to ask staff to give us some additional notice. When you see things slipping, let us know. The other thing that concerns me is our last meeting, we heard a wonderful presentation. And then there was this, well, tonight we would like to have some input. And I remember saying, oh, wait a minute. You must have known you wanted input from us. Why didn't why didn't we hear about this earlier so we could have prepared? In other words, I feel this board needs, in my opinion, more input from the staff, more detail as to what is going on. And when things are noticed, we're informed right away and not in the fourth quarter.
As is often the case in government, you have to pivot, and we did not anticipate each quarter we have kind of an anticipated compliance rate based on the past, and it fluctuates. I don't know if it would have been possible to anticipate that our collections would have gone down this last quarter. We've had previous fiscal years where it was tight. We avoided deficits every year. One year we had a surplus of around, or we were in the black by about $50,000, and we were concerned at the end of that fiscal year whether or not we'd meet that goal. We did. But this fiscal year, based on a combination of those two factors that I mentioned, the first being cost pool and the second being this collection rate, have resulted in the numbers as they are right now. Now, if we increase our collection rate, not only will we eliminate not just for this last couple of months, but going forward, we'll not only eliminate the deficit, but we'll add enough revenue to end the year with hopefully a modest, if not healthy, budget surplus. We do our best to inform the board of important things as they come up. And this is something that came up just as soon as the last quarter hit. We noticed our projection rates were going to be such that we would potentially have this deficit.
Board member, if I may add, the board has the power to direct staff, even in this particular meeting, to present quarterly, bi-monthly, whatever time period, reports on the budget, health of the budget, revenue, expenditures, so you all know if you're trying to get to that point.
I appreciate that, General Counsel, because I find it difficult to think maybe third quarter, nothing was noticed, not even 1% less, nothing. So I appreciate that input. Thank you.
And we can look into the numbers and get back to the board as to, when the numbers started to be of concern. So, but up until I believe this last quarter, our numbers looked good, looked regular, and we just seen that based on where we were at, it's very possible we'll have this deficit.
So in third quarter, that would have been a good time to say, oh, first and second quarter pretty good, third quarter we're some kind of indication? Well, I found out about it first time soon after the last board meeting, when we looked at our most recent expense versus revenue report. So, obviously we had to pivot, and that has to happen sometimes in government. The unknown. And I guess one of the things I learned when I got my degree in public administration is that government is one of their main jobs is to deal with the turbulence of unexpected events that happen. And, keeping that in mind, I think you can understand that, despite staff's best efforts, sometimes there are things we cannot control. Well, Executive Director, I appreciate that that you mentioned government, because if I were on the board of the Coca-Cola Corporation and the COO comes in the fourth quarter and says, guess what? Or if I were in Disney Corporation and the COO comes in and says this fourth quarter, but since it's government, then okay, I think I can understand that point. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Board Member Espinoza, any more questions? Board Member Dawkins, any more questions?
No.
Okay. Well, I have some questions. I'm wondering on the cost pool negotiations, it seemed like the city was making these extravagant demands. Did the report that actually came out, did that come out favorably for us in our negotiating with them?
So, yes, the new study, the draft study, still is being finalized as part of the negotiations. Did reduce our cost pool significantly in some areas. So the answer is yes to that. The overall issue with cost pool, though, doesn't go away. And the overall issue is that if you have a system where if I call you to say I want to work with you, partner with you to solve problems in the city, that every time I call you or you call me or that I work with you, you charge me more, that disincentivizes interaction, and it creates a system also where to avoid these charges, you know, there's a natural inclination to try to solve problems also on your own. Why call IT when, you know, our resident our resident guru in the staff knows stuff? You know, there's an incentive to avoid this interaction with the city when you have a system that's set up like that. Just bear in mind also that all the other city departments, when they pay cost pool, they don't pay cost pool. I'm going to say that again. City departments that pay cost pool don't pay cost pool. It's the same money. It's within the same pool of money. It's just moving money around. When the rent program pays cost pool, it actually increases the general fund. So that's the issue I see. And that's why we're trying to reach a mutual support agreement where we'll continue to support the city like we have with the relocation ordinance, like we can with other possible ordinances, and the city, to incentivize and encourage cooperation, will say that there are certain charges, specifically central service charges, that should be waived to encourage partnership.
So, but
I'm sorry, Chair, temporary chair. I just want to remind the board, it's ongoing negotiations. Ordinarily, it would not be discussed in public. In fact, never is discussed in public. And, you know, city manager obviously listens to our meetings, public listens to our meetings. It kind of can hurt our negotiation position. You can feel free to ask what you like, but I just want to put that out there as a reminder. Also, one thing about your question regarding the cost pool study, Matrix is performing that study. The study is ongoing. I don't know if anything's favorable or unfavorable because the numbers that have been presented are currently being challenged by staff. Even the numbers that might look lower than they were prior, still being challenged by staff. So just for clarity on that, but the negotiation point, I think, is my main point here.
well, thank you. We never, for option 2, the landlord fees would be raised higher than $255, is that correct? $264, wasn't it?
Option 1, I'm sorry. Option 1 would be $255, approximately $255 for controlled rental units and $145 for partially controlled units. Option 2 would be $262 for controlled rental units and $148 for partially covered units.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of difference there, so that's good. But the landlord fees were artificially low, weren't they, last year?
Well, last year we did not include certain cost pool charges
Yes.
as they were being challenged, and that resulted in the fees
Being a lot
being,
lower.
right.
So, but the landlords aren't going to understand that.
We did mention when we passed the budget that there was a very good possibility that as cost pool charges could possibly be re-implemented, that that may impact the for the next fiscal year.
I just want to remind the board, last year you removed your reserves from your budget. Your reserve made up about 15% of your budget. That was why the fees were reduced substantially.
Well, that's part of our job is to keep the fees as low as possible, so. And I just, let me find it here. The mediations are up 388%.
Petitions, tenant
Petitions.
petitions filed.
Okay. But the mediations, nothing's come to us, so that it seems to me like staff is doing a good job of mediation, if none of this is coming up, rising up.
There's different types of mediation. There are kind of the landlord-tenant dispute resolution mediations, and those don't come before the board. They're just handled by public information staff.
Okay.
There are what are called combined settlement conferences, which are a form of mediation that the hearing examiner can offer to the both parties, similar to that happens in court, where you can settle disputes as long as they're within the bounds of the law.
Are you referring to appeals?
Appeals.
You mean appeals,
yeah.
okay.
Thank you. Well, whatever, it seems like staff is doing a good job because it doesn't rise up to us.
That's right.
And that's really amazing.
Unfortunately, the board only sees the decisions that people challenge, and the vast majority are not challenged, and there's no usual issue with them.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. Actually, you guys are doing a good job. I'm through. Board Member Espinoza, any more questions? Board Member Dawkins, any more questions?
Well, your questioning brought up a comment from General Counsel that maybe you could explore a little bit more. My understanding is that the reserves were 18 to 25%. You're saying they're really 18%?
I'm going to pass that on to the Deputy Director. I believe you should get a presentation about the reserves next meeting, but I believe it was 15, but I could be wrong. The Deputy Director probably has better information as to what we allocated for, what we took out of last year's budget.
In prior years, it's been between 18 to 15%.
I see, okay. Then I misspoke because somewhere I've gotten written 18 to 25%, but maybe that was a recommendation of that 10-year.
No, you're correct. Your policy, the Rent Board's reserves policy is that you should keep a minimum of 18% and a maximum of 25%. Once you hit the 25%, you're not allowed to collect any more reserves. And that the overage should be applied to reduce landlords' fees. So last year, you were over the 25% limit. So in order to reduce the landlord fee in compliance with your reserve policy, you removed the reserve as a line item. The line item reserve made up a significant portion of landlords' fees, I think. I mean, it's like 18, like you said, right? You're aiming for 18%, but you don't get to 18% by charging the landlords 18% right away on one line item. That'd be too heavy. So you inch your way up there. That's why the reserve line item percentage is lower than the reserve policy minimum required percentage. You just take your time to build up your reserves. If that makes sense. So removal of that significantly decreased it, but then the board added staff members that then replaced that decrease, and that's why you're seeing the fees going back up despite the fact that there's no reserve line item.
So I know reserves have a special, there was a special purpose for them when we can only use them for certain things. I don't remember that the reserves could be used to reduce the landlord fees in any way. Am I correct?
The reserves aren't used to reduce the fees, but if that 25% limit, if the reserves go beyond that, that's when we do reserve the fee. We reduce the fees, but we don't reduce it out of the reserve. Once it hits that cap, that's the calculation to reduce the next fiscal year's fees.
Yeah, okay, but we're in a pickle now. We've got to do something. If I were a landlord, I mean, and I heard these projected fees, so to maybe temper some of that surprise, do we have a minimum reserve instead of, let's say, a red line that we cannot possibly ever go below 10%, so that we can use some of our reserve to reduce these fees?
So the GOFA recommends that you keep a minimum of 15% in reserves. I'm not sure what our current reserve levels are. Mr. Tran would know that better than I, but it's the rent board's policy to have up to 25%. You could hypothetically change your policy, lower that percentage to whatever you like, and then the overage could be applied to reducing a landlord fee.
Yeah, I'm just really concerned. Like I said, I've been a landlord, and I understand some of the costs associated with owning property, and this would shock me if I heard those. And I would like not to have the landlords in the city of Richmond shocked and have a negative impression of us because we want to keep a positive impression of this program. Perhaps that's something we can examine, Executive Director. Maybe take a look at some way we can help as far as the reserves are concerned.
I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that, but I'm assuming you're talking about the possibility of adjusting the reserve policy, or is that what you're inferring?
I'm talking about the possibility of reducing the hit on landlords for our rental fee because of this $250,000 deficit. That's what's concerning me. If that means that we do something with our reserve policy to put in some additional money to reduce those fees, I'm all for hearing what staff thinks about that.
No, conteste y después.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you. If I can just, so the reserve policy, again, requires you have a minimum of 18, maximum of 25%, right? And that's some dollar amount that we currently have in that bucket of reserves. It's not the deficit, as you've mentioned, should be of concern to the board, and rightfully you bring it up. But it's not the deficit that's driving up next year's fees. When next year's fees are determined, they're determined separately from your currently running deficit. The proposed 255, that proposal is coming not from this year, not from this fiscal year, and this fiscal year incurred expenses. It's coming from next fiscal year's incurred expenses. So the way you would reduce your fees from next fiscal year would be reducing your expenditures in your next fiscal year. Offsetting your deficit in this fiscal year would not reduce your fees the next fiscal year.
Oh no, maybe a misunderstanding. No, this was to be done in the next fiscal year, not this. We're almost done. This is the end of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, but your deficit is an expenditure that was determined in this fiscal year. So even if you paid off your deficit, it would be paying off this current fiscal year. Your fees are based off of the current fiscal year, right? So this budget is 24-25. This proposed budget is 24-25. The expenditures and the revenues in that budget are confined to 24-25.
Okay.
Which means your fees, corresponding fees, are confined to 24-25. Yeah, so it's important to pay off the deficit for all sorts of reasons, but the outcome of paying your deficit, whether that be in this fiscal year or next fiscal year, will not impact your fees in the next fiscal year. Your fees are directly correlated to your expenditures in the box of the fiscal year you're operating in. And so in order to reduce your fees for 24-25, you have to look at your line items. I'm not sure where they are, but you look at the line items and you see where you can reduce the expenditure in each line item to bring down the corresponding fee. So either that's lowering staff salary, which might be difficult because of all sorts of legal arguments. Right. Or with the executive staff, well, I don't know. But anyways, I can look into that if you like. And then looking at your line items, see if where you can knock some cost out, or considering hiring freezes. There's a lot of things that the board can consider to stabilize itself and its fees, but that's exactly why the board in prior years have adopted a 10-year financial projection for you all to see, so that you know what the next 5 to 10 years looks like. So if you don't like how it looks, you can start chipping away at whatever expenditures may be occurring in the future years.
Yeah, Board Member Thompson, I really appreciate you asking the question about the fees. I think that's significant.
Si no estoy mal, el año pasado ya redujimos los costos de lo que se le cobra a las unidades. ¿Lo hicimos o no lo hicimos?
Oh, in my understanding, last year we reduced the amount of the fees that we charge per unit. We did it or we didn't do it?
No lo recuerdo.
She doesn't remember.
The fees were reduced by about $5 or so. But yes, they were reduced last year, but that had to do with what General Counsel mentioned.
A mí lo que me gustaría ver es tal vez el presupuesto hecho con los costos que se tienen actualmente y tal vez no con una reducción. La verdad yo no veo punto a que reduzcamos los costos, sino tal vez con un aumento. Lo siento, pero sí necesitamos mantenernos bien.
What she would like to see is the budget not with the reduction, because she believes that we should not reduce the amount of the fees. She's okay with the amount of money that we are charging, but she would like to see the budget with all the numbers and specific, like, Tomasa, en los gastos que se hacen?
Sí, para el presupuesto completo.
Okay, she would like to see the number with the budget, like the complete budget that is going to be for the next 24-25.
Bad debt as in the accounts receivable amount? Or, I just want to clarify, or do you mean bad debt as in the amount that we feel we can't collect?
No. ¿Cómo sería el budget si con lo que cobramos ahora, o si tuviéramos un aumento, tal vez no tan alto, pero un aumento pequeño en lo que se les cobra a las unidades?
She would like to see a budget with the increase of the fees that we do per unit. Like, how will be the budget, like the total amount? How would you use the expenses, I think. That's what I understand.
Our plan was initially, prior to our board meetings being canceled, to have the draft budget to you by this point. The draft budget would include all of the line items, including any additional requests for additional resources. But prior to actually providing a line item budget, we needed to receive the board's feedback in terms of priorities. As I mentioned before, we had to pivot from ending potentially the fiscal year in the black to ending it in the red, and that changes the analysis. We would have probably asked for additional funds for counselors, for an additional counselor, but we're trying to limit it to only the most vital positions and vital costs. So vital to the program is interpretation, making sure we can hold our board meetings. We can't get anything done without board meetings. Vital to the board's priorities is expanding outreach and community education, so we've included a budget that doubles that. And then vital to our existence also is being able to increase the compliance rate, the collection rate, and collect more revenue from properties that are either delinquent or that are skirting under the radar. So with those realities, we presented a high-level budget option, or a high-level budget options based on those factors. When we present the actual draft budget, it's going to have all of the line items, including whatever the board says they want us to come back with. The board says, we want you to do nothing except the mandated salary increases. We could do that. If the board says, we want budget option 1 to incorporate our priorities, we can do that. And of course, we can do budget option 2 as well, which would hopefully increase our compliance rate. The higher compliance we have, the more that we collect, the less likely we're going to have future budget deficits. And so I think that budget option 2 does present an opportunity to invest in increasing our compliance for the future. It does obviously cost money to do that. And we are cognizant of the impact that it could have on the fees. Yet at the same time, we have to put forth a budget that reflects the board's priorities and the agency's priorities. So that's kind of where it is. Okay, so that's kind of where we stand at this point. And what we're hoping from the board tonight is to have this discussion about whether or not it makes sense to go with budget option 1, budget option 2, or another budget option that is based on the board's direction. So we presented the 2 options that we thought reflected both the agency's needs and the board priorities. There is, of course, a risk that our collection rate doesn't increase, and we could have mounting deficits, and that could result in us having to cut in the future. But so far, we've been pretty good at ending we've been excellent at ending the fiscal year in the black, and this is the one year that we've had this pretty steep drop in collections during the last quarter, or the last 2 quarters, yeah.
Just to clarify, do you mean when you say bad debt, do you want a variance report for each line item? Is that what you're asking for?
Are you talking to Board Member Espinoza?
Correct.
You have to say it, because she's talking.
Okay. Board Member Espinoza, regarding the term bad debt, do you mean as in a report that has the variances between specific line items as to what was spent and what was budgeted?
Sí.
There was a slide that I did not include in this presentation that I was working on, but I think it's important for the board to know that generally you don't want to spend when you have a deficit, or you want to at least keep spending down to a minimum, but there are exceptions to that rule. Of course, deficit spending is necessary during emergencies, to invest in your infrastructure. So for example, if we had to spend money to build a new building for the agency or a new database, it makes sense sometimes to deficit spend for that. And the other reason you deficit spend would be if you're spending funds on something that will bring more funds in. And compliance specialists, based on the number of outstanding units we have, there's millions of dollars of units of funds that can be collected with more aggressive collection efforts. And one of the things we envision with this compliance specialist is that not only would they specialize in focusing on these delinquent units, but they would do a lot of research on all these properties that are skirting under the radar. These include ADUs that are unpermitted, that have been built in backyards that are rented. These include a lot of single-family homes that are rented, but they don't tell us. These include duplexes and triplexes where they claim that they're owner-occupied or that they're not rented, when in reality they are. And so we discover these things every day. We find, I mean, I don't want to speak for staff, but I know, because I sit next to Ramona all day, and she's talking to landlords all day long with those types of issues. So, all of that said, there are some exceptions to the rule of don't spend during a deficit, and this may very well be one of those years where it makes sense to invest in staff that can increase our compliance rate. So, that said, I also understand that one of the key concerns is keeping the fee reasonable and making sure that it doesn't create a shock, like you said, to the payee, and that's one of our priorities. We've always focused on doing that to make sure that obviously if the fee goes up too high too quickly, that, like you said, it can be a shocking thing, and it could actually have the reverse effect and sometimes lower collection. But if you offset that by increased collection efforts, presumably you're going to make up the difference. And of course, you don't know. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. We do our best to anticipate what could happen. But in this particular case, those two factors that I mentioned have really been the cause of the projected deficit. And we do believe that there's a good chance we could narrow the gap significantly with the efforts that our compliance staff are working on right now, and with the possibility that the negotiations with the city will be successful. And so we're going to present a draft budget that reflects the board's priorities, staff recommendations that the board agrees with, and of course these factors that are still yet to be known that will hopefully be known by the time we adopt the budget.
Are there any more questions from the board members? Well, seeing as there are no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers if there are any.
There are no speakers on this item.
Okay, well, we need a motion to do option 1 or option 2?
We need a motion to do option 1, option 2, or some variation thereof, or to give staff direction in terms of what type of draft budget to bring back at the next board meeting, whether it reflects option 1, option 2, or some variation.
Do we have a motion?
I have a question.
Can you speak
Is it
closer to the
option,
mic? Bring the mic closer to you, if you don't mind. Yes, thank you.
is it option 1 or option 2, or could it be option 1 and option 2
Well, option
for a
2.
draft budget?
Option 2 is essentially option 1 and option 2 together. Option 1 does not include the addition of a compliance specialist. So that's the only main difference.
Yes, it could be option 1 and it could be option 2, or it could be option 1 and option 2 if you want to see two different budgets.
Right.
Or it can be neither of them, option 3, like Mr. Trailer mentioned. Or it can be something else entirely different that you all come up with.
But I'm thinking option 2.
I make a motion that the staff bring back a draft budget for option 2 in our next regular meeting.
Okay. Can I have a second?
Yes, second.
Board Member Espinoza, second. Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Dawkins,
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza,
Yes.
and Board Member Height.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes, directing staff to bring back, prepare a draft budget for option 2.
Also bear in mind that when we bring the draft budget, and also as part of the fee study, we look at what comparable or similar jurisdictions are charging, and you will see that the fees in various similar agencies that have the same type of more strict regulation as the rent program here does, have seen their fees go up significantly as a result not only of the inflationary costs, but to the cost associated with continuing to develop their agencies. So, so we'll show you that the board will be provided with that information as well, so you can take a look at what the other jurisdictions are charging.
I forgot to add for the record, motion passes with Chair Cantor and Vice Chair Guadalupe absent. Sorry. All right. The next item on the agenda is reports of officers. Item G.
Our next scheduled meeting, I believe, is, oh yeah, we do need to check on folks' availability. The next meeting we have scheduled would be the 15th, which is the regular board meeting. Right now, we don't have enough board members who are available for that meeting. The 30th also looks like there's not enough to have a quorum, as well as the 31st. So really, we're kind of running tight. So we need to find out if the board members are available for the 15th, the regular meeting on the 15th, a special meeting on the 30th, potentially a special meeting on the 31st, and then a meeting on June 11th. That would be a special meeting, and then the regular meeting on June 17th. So if we could get an update from board members as to whether or not you can attend those board meetings, it will definitely assist us in preparing for those
Let me
meetings.
chime in real quick. The regular board meeting in June is scheduled for Wednesday, June 19th. It's possible, I don't know, I heard the city might have approved for staff to, they're going to celebrate Juneteenth, so our offices will be closed. So we have a placeholder for June 17th in that event. So that's why we came up with the June 17th date. Normally, it just fell on the third Wednesday. Juneteenth fell on the third Wednesday. So we just wanted to poll everyone to see if you guys are available on the 17th. That is a Monday. Okay? So if you guys could let us know. And we just put in placeholders for those other dates that he mentioned, May 30th and May 31st, just in case other board members are not available, if you guys are not available for those regular meetings.
Cool.
We'll send the board an email reminder to poll for those meetings as well.
Okay.
All right.
Is that it?
That's
That's
it.
it.
We can adjourn? What time is it?
7:32.
7:32.
Meeting adjourned at 7:32 PM.
Thank you. Thank you.